Montana Territory, 1882. The frontier still bore its teeth in the shadows between settlements where law stretched thin as a cobweb across the wilderness. In these spaces between civilization, a man lived by his own code or died by someone else's. Mitchell Ryder knew this truth better than most. The spring rain pelted against the brim of his hat as Mitchell guided his chestnut gelding through the muddy trail winding down from the foothills. At 26, he had the weathered eyes of men twice his age, though the rest of him remained youthful, lean, and strong from years in the saddle. His light stubble couldn't hide the handsome lines of his jaw, but he took no particular pride in his appearance. The Montana wilderness had taught him that survival demanded focus, not vanity. "What do you think, Thunder?" he asked his horse, patting the animal's muscular neck. "Another day, another dollar for the rocking R." The horse snorted in response, seemingly as eager as Mitchell to reach dry shelter. 4 days of tracking strays from the ranch where he worked had left them both tired and soaked to the bone. His canvas coat had given up the fight against the rain hours ago. Mitchell believed the frontier made no room for attachment. His parents' graves on a failed homestead had taught him that lesson when he was just 12. The West devoured the weak and the unlucky alike. Better to keep moving, to stay useful but unattached. Ranch hands could always find work, and when trouble found him, as it occasionally did, he could simply ride on to the next spread. No goodbyes, no heartache, no looking back. As Thunder carried him around a bend in the trail, Mitchell spotted smoke rising from a chimney about half a mile ahead, Clearwater Station, the last outpost before reaching the Rocking R Ranch. The small settlement consisted of a general store, a stable, and a modest inn that served travelers on the trail between Helena and the northern ranches. The rain intensified as they approached, turning from a steady drizzle to a downpour that obscured everything beyond 20 yards. Mitchell urged Thunder toward the welcoming light of the station, promising the loyal animal a dry stall and extra oats for their troubles. The single street of Clearwater Station had transformed into a ribbon of mud. Mitchell dismounted at the hitching post outside the general store, his boots sinking ankle-deep in the muck. Thunder shook violently, sending water flying in all directions. "Easy there," Mitchell murmured, pulling his saddlebags free and slinging them over his shoulder. "I'll get you settled once I check in." Thunder's ears suddenly pricked forward, alert to something Mitchell couldn't immediately perceive. Then he heard it too, a woman's voice, raised in distress, coming from around the corner of the building. "I told you I'm not going back, leave me be." "You don't have a say in the matter," a man's voice growled in response. "Your father paid good money to find you, and find you I did." Mitchell hesitated. Other people's troubles weren't his concern. He'd learned long ago that inserting himself into strangers' disputes only invited problems he didn't need. Yet something in the woman's voice, a note of genuine fear, made him pause. The sound of a slap cut through the rain, followed by a pained cry. Before Mitchell could reconsider, he found himself rounding the corner of the building. Thunder followed unbidden, as if sensing his rider's sudden change of course. In the narrow alley between the general store and the stables, a burly man in a black duster had a young woman pressed against the wall. His hand was raised for another blow. She struggled against his grip, her face turned away. "That's enough," Mitchell called, his voice steady despite the anger rising in his chest. The man turned, revealing a face marred by a jagged scar running from his left eye to his jawline. "This ain't your concern, cowboy. Move along." The woman's eyes found Mitchell's, wide with fear and a desperate plea. She couldn't have been more than 20, with honey-blonde hair plastered to her face by the rain. Her blue dress was travel-stained, and a fresh red mark bloomed on her cheek where the man had struck her. "I'm making it my concern," Mitchell replied, stepping closer. "Let her go." The scarred man sneered. "I'm employed by her father to bring her home. This is family business. Doesn't look like she wants to go. She don't get to decide, now back off before." Mitchell moved faster than the man anticipated, crossing the distance between them in 3 quick strides. His right hand shot out, gripping the man's wrist and twisting sharply, forcing him to release the woman. With his left hand, Mitchell shoved the man back, putting himself between the stranger and the young woman. "I said that's enough." The scarred man stumbled, then regained his footing. His hand moved to his hip where a revolver hung in a worn holster. Mitchell tensed, ready to dive for cover. You willing to die for a girl you don't even know? The man snarled. Before either man could make another move, the door to the general store banged open. An elderly man with a shotgun stepped out into the rain. Trouble at my establishment means trouble with me, the old man announced, leveling the shotgun. I don't much care who started it, but I'll damn sure finish it. The scarred man's eyes darted between Mitchell and the shotgun. After a tense moment, he stepped back, hands slightly raised. This ain't over, he said, looking past Mitchell to the woman. Your father wants you home, Penelope. One way or another, you're going back to Bitterroot. Tell my father I'm never going back, she said, her voice trembling but determined. Not to him, and certainly not to Garrett. The scarred man spat in the mud. We'll see about that. He backed away, eyes never leaving Mitchell's face. You made an enemy today, Cowboy. Wouldn't be the first, Mitchell replied evenly. They watched as the man stalked to the hitching post out front, mounted a mud-spattered bay, and rode out of town, heading west. Only when the rider disappeared into the curtain of rain did Mitchell turn to the woman. She stood shivering against the wall, arms wrapped tightly around herself. You all right, miss? She nodded slightly, then winced as the movement caused her pain. Thank you, she whispered. As she turned her face toward him fully, Mitchell noticed the bruise on her cheekbone wasn't the only one. An older, yellowing bruise marked her jaw, partially hidden by her hair. Name's Mitchell Ryder, he said, removing his hat. I work at the Rocking R north of here. Penelope Campbell, she replied. Her eyes, a striking deep green, assessed him cautiously. Though I suppose you gathered that already. The old storekeeper lowered his shotgun. Better come inside, both of you. That fella might decide to circle back with friends. Mitchell nodded. Need to stable my horse first. I'll be right along. As he led Thunder toward the stable, Mitchell silently cursed himself. He'd just broken his own rule about staying out of other people's troubles. Yet the image of those bruises, old and new, and the fear in Penelope Campbell's eyes had triggered something in him he couldn't ignore. The stable boy took charge of Thunder, promising extra oats and a thorough rubdown. Mitchell handed over a coin, then made his way back to the general store, his mind troubled. Something told him the scarred man wouldn't give up so easily. Whatever he just stepped into, it wasn't going to end with a simple intervention in the rain. Inside the store, Penelope sat near the pot-bellied stove, a woolen blanket draped across her shoulders. The storekeeper's wife, a kindly woman with silver hair, pressed a cup of hot coffee into Mitchell's hands as he entered. Harold Finch, the old man with the shotgun, introduced himself. This is my wife, Martha. We run Clearwater Station. Obliged for the backup, Mitchell said, nodding toward the shotgun now propped beside the door. Been expecting trouble since Miss Campbell arrived on yesterday's stage, Harold replied. Girl was clearly running from something. Penelope stared into her cup. I didn't mean to bring danger to your establishment. Nonsense, dear, Martha said. No woman travels alone in this weather without good reason. Mitchell studied Penelope more carefully now that they were in the light. She was beautiful, despite the bruises, or perhaps more striking because of the strength evident in her eyes despite them. Her honey blonde hair hung in damp waves past her shoulders, and now that she'd removed her sodden coat, he could see she wore a traveling dress of faded blue cotton, simple but well-made. She was small in stature, no more than 5'4", but held herself with a dignity that suggested breeding. That man, Mitchell said carefully, he mentioned your father sent him. Penelope's fingers tightened around her cup. My father is Harlan Campbell, she said, as if the name should mean something. When Mitchell showed no recognition, she continued. He owns the largest cattle operation in the Bitterroot Valley, the Campbell Ranch is. Influential. And wealthy enough to send men after a runaway daughter, Harold added. I'm 20 years old, Penelope said, a flash of defiance sparking in her eyes. Hardly a child to be dragged home. Why are you running? Mitchell asked directly. She met his gaze steadily. My father arranged my marriage to Garrett Williamson, son of his business partner. The wedding was to take place next month. Her hand unconsciously rose to touch the fading bruise on her jaw. Garrett showed me what married life would be like during our engagement. I decided I preferred any alternative. The room fell silent except for the crackling of the stove and the drumming of rain on the roof. "Where were you headed?" Martha asked gently. "My mother's sister lives in Helena. I was hoping—" She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "But it seems my father's reach is longer than I anticipated. That man, Jeb Blackwater, is one of my father's trackers. He won't give up easily." Mitchell felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He just interfered with the affairs of a powerful rancher. Your father sanctions Williamson's behavior. Penelope's laugh held no humor. My father believes a man has the right to discipline his wife as he sees fit. He finds my objections tiresome. Outside, the rain continued to pour. Mitchell knew he should walk away, get a room for the night, and continue to the rocking R in the morning. This wasn't his fight. Getting involved with a woman fleeing a powerful family would only complicate his carefully uncomplicated life. And yet, as he looked at Penelope Campbell's bruised face and the determination in her eyes, something shifted inside him. "Miss Campbell," he said finally, "I'm riding to the rocking R tomorrow. It's about 15 miles north of here. The ranch owner, Joseph Davis, is a good man. He might have work for you cooking or housekeeping until you figure out your next move." Harold and Martha exchanged glances. "It's not a bad idea," Harold said. "The rocking R is far enough from the main trails that Blackwater might not think to look there right away." Penelope looked at Mitchell with cautious hope. "Why would you help me?" Mitchell wasn't entirely sure himself. "No one deserves what was happening in that alley," he said simply, "and I've seen what men like Williamson can do to a woman over time. My mother—" He stopped, surprised at himself for nearly sharing something he never spoke about. Penelope seemed to understand anyway. "Thank you, Mr. Ryder, I accept your offer." That night, Mitchell lay awake in his rented room above the general store, listening to the rain. He told himself he was simply doing the decent thing, helping a woman in trouble find temporary sanctuary. Once she was safely at the rocking R, she would be Joseph's concern, not his. He would return to his solitary life, to the rhythm of cattle and seasons that required no emotional entanglements. Yet something about Penelope Campbell's courage in the face of her circumstances had stirred something long dormant in him. The frontier had taught Mitchell that attachment was dangerous, that love was a luxury few could afford in a land where death walked so close. But for the first time in years, he found himself questioning whether that was truly wisdom or merely fear disguised as pragmatism. Sleep finally claimed him as the rain gentled to a soft patter against the window, and he dreamed of green eyes and honey-blonde hair. The morning dawned clear and crisp, the storm having blown itself out overnight. Mitchell rose before sunrise, checking his gear and preparing thunder for the journey north. He found Penelope already waiting downstairs, dressed in clothes Martha had provided: sturdy trousers, a man's shirt, and a worn leather coat that would serve better for riding than her dress. "Mrs. Finch thought these would be more practical," she explained, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "I hope they're not improper." "On the frontier, practical trumps proper every time," Mitchell replied, surprised to find himself smiling. "You ride." "Since I was 6, she said, lifting her chin slightly. "My father may have outdated notions about a woman's place, but he made sure I could handle myself on horseback." Harold appeared from the back room. "Got you a mount," he told Penelope. "Nothing fancy, but Daisy's steady and sure-footed. She'll get you to the rocking R without trouble." "I can't accept," Penelope began, but Harold waved away her protest. "Consider it a loan. Joseph can send her back with one of his boys when you're settled." As they prepared to leave, Martha pressed a package of food into Penelope's hands and hugged her tightly. "You stay strong, girl," she whispered. "Some men are worth trusting." Mitchell pretended not to hear, focusing instead on checking Thunder's cinch. The weight of responsibility he felt toward Penelope was unfamiliar and uncomfortable. He had spent years avoiding precisely this type of entanglement. They set out as the sun crested the eastern mountains, painting the rain-washed landscape in gold. The trail north wound through pine forests and open meadows, following the course of a swollen creek. Mitchell kept a careful watch on their back trail, though he doubted Blackwater would guess their destination. Penelope rode well, sitting Daisy with natural grace despite what must have been considerable discomfort from her injuries. She kept pace with Mitchell without complaint, maintaining a thoughtful silence as they traveled. You're not what I expected, Mitchell said finally, breaking the quiet of mid-morning. Penelope glanced at him. What did you expect? Someone more, he searched for the right word. Helpless, I suppose. Disappointed, there was a hint of challenge in her voice. No, he said honestly. Impressed. She looked away, but not before he caught the ghost of a smile. I may have lived a privileged life, Mr. Ryder, but I'm not unfamiliar with hardship. My mother died when I was 16. Since then, I've managed my father's household and learned that survival sometimes requires adaptation. Mitchell, he corrected, if we're going to be riding together, Mr. Ryder seems overly formal. Mitchell, she repeated, and something about the way she said his name made him unreasonably pleased. How old are you? He asked, curious. 20 last December, she replied. Old enough to know my own mind, despite what my father believes. And what does your mind tell you to do now, after the rocking R, I mean? Penelope was quiet for a long moment. I had hoped to reach my aunt in Helena, but I fear my father will look for me there first. Beyond that, she sighed. I have some education. I can read, write, keep accounts. Perhaps I could find work as a teacher or shopkeeper's assistant somewhere far from Montana territory. Alone, the idea troubled Mitchell more than it should have. I don't have much choice, she said simply, unless you're proposing marriage, Mitchell Ryder. Her tone was teasing, but her eyes, when they met his, held a question that made his heart beat faster. I'm not the marrying kind, he said, the words automatic. The frontier's no place for, he stopped, realizing how his words might sound to her. That is, I mean. Penelope laughed, the sound bright and unexpected. Don't worry, I wasn't actually proposing, though your expression was quite priceless. Mitchell felt heat rise in his face, something that hadn't happened in years. You caught me off guard, he admitted. I suspect that doesn't happen often. Not until yesterday, he agreed. They rode in companionable silence for a while, following the winding trail as it climbed toward a ridge that would give them their first view of the rocking R Valley. Mitchell found himself stealing glances at Penelope, noting the straight line of her back, the determined set of her jaw, the way the morning light caught in her hair. Tell me about the rocking R, she said as they began the ascent. What kind of man is Joseph Davis? Fair, Mitchell replied without hesitation, tough when he needs to be, but decent. He built the ranch from nothing after the war, lost his wife to fever 10 years back, raised his son alone. The boy's away at school back east now. And the other hands, will they accept my presence? Mitchell understood her concern. A single woman at a remote ranch could face difficulties beyond mere gossip. They're good men, mostly. Any that aren't answer to Joseph and to me, you'll be safe there. She studied him curiously. You've worked there long. 3 years this time. Longest I've stayed anywhere since I was a boy. This time. Mitchell hesitated, then decided honesty was simplest. I worked there when I was younger, left for a spell, came back. Why did you leave? The question probed too close to things Mitchell preferred not to discuss. Thought I needed to see more of the territory, he said, which wasn't entirely untrue. Found out the views pretty much the same everywhere. Penelope seemed to sense his reluctance to elaborate. Well, I'm grateful you returned when you did, she said softly. I don't like to think what might have happened if you hadn't come along yesterday. Mitchell nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. No, she said with quiet certainty, they wouldn't have. They crested the ridge around noon, pausing to rest the horses and eat some of the food Martha had packed. Below them stretched the rocking R, a broad valley cradled by mountains, with the ranch buildings clustered near a bend in the river. Cattle dotted the greening spring pastures and smoke rose from the main house chimney. It's beautiful, Penelope said, gazing down at the valley. It's home, Mitchell replied, surprising himself with the admission. He'd never thought of any place as home since his parents died. As they prepared to continue, a movement on the trail behind them caught Mitchell's eye. He tensed, hand dropping to the revolver at his hip. What is it? Penelope asked, instantly alert. Riders, Mitchell said, squinting against the sun. 3 of them coming fast. Penelope's face paled. Blackwater. Can't tell yet, but we shouldn't wait to find out. He swung back into the saddle. The ranch is about 2 hours from here at a steady pace. If we push hard, we can make it in less. They set off down the ridge at a fast trot, the horses sensing their rider's urgency. Mitchell kept glancing back, watching as the distant riders grew more distinct. One rode a bay horse that looked familiar. "It's him," he confirmed grimly, "Blackwater and two others. They must have asked questions at Clearwater Station." "Harold and Martha wouldn't have told them," Penelope said, voice tight with worry. "They wouldn't have to. 3 strangers asking about a young woman and a cowboy. Word travels fast in small settlements." The trail descended steeply through pine forest, forcing them to slow despite the danger behind. Mitchell's mind raced, calculating distances and options. The rocking R was still too far to reach before their pursuers caught up. "There's a line shack about half an hour ahead," he said as they emerged from the trees into a meadow. "We could hole up there, wait for them to pass." Penelope shook her head. "They'll see our tracks in this mud. We need to keep moving." She was right, the spring-sodden ground betrayed their passage clearly. "Then we ride hard and hope we reach help before they reach us," Mitchell said. They urged their mounts to a gallop across the meadow. Thunder, strong and trail-hardened, took the lead easily, but Daisy struggled to maintain the pace. Penelope leaned forward, murmuring encouragement to the mare, her face set with determination. The riders behind them were gaining ground. Mitchell estimated they had perhaps 20 minutes before Blackwater and his men would overtake them. The line shack came into view as they rounded a bend in the trail, a small, sturdy cabin used by the ranch hands during roundup when they worked the high pastures. "Change of plan," Mitchell called to Penelope. "We make a stand here." Her eyes widened, but she nodded without argument, following him to the cabin. They dismounted quickly, leading the horses behind the structure where they wouldn't be immediately visible from the trail. The cabin's interior was Spartan but defensible, a single room with a stone fireplace, plank table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bunk. A small window faced the trail, perfect for keeping watch. Mitchell checked the cupboard and found what he'd hoped for, a Winchester rifle and a box of ammunition left for emergencies. "Can you shoot?" he asked Penelope as he loaded the rifle. "Yes," she said simply, accepting the weapon when he handed it to her. Mitchell drew his Colt revolver, checking that all 6 chambers were loaded. "I don't want bloodshed if we can avoid it," he told her, "but I won't let them take you." Penelope positioned herself by the window, rifle ready. "Neither will I." They waited in tense silence as the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. Mitchell stood to the side of the door, revolver held low. 3 riders, Penelope reported from the window. "Blackwater and 2 others. They're slowing down. They've spotted the cabin." "Let me do the talking," Mitchell said. "If shooting starts, aim for their horses first. Unhorsed men are less of a threat out here." The riders came to a stop outside. "We know you're in there, Ryder," Blackwater's voice carried clearly. "Send the Campbell girl out, and you can ride away from this." Mitchell caught Penelope's eye and shook his head slightly. "Not happening, Blackwater," he called back. "Miss Campbell's under my protection now. You'd best ride on." A different voice answered, deeper, with the lazy drawl of the Texas border. "We got no quarrel with you, cowboy. This is family business. Her daddy just wants her home safe." "If her father cared about her safety, he wouldn't have promised her to a man who uses his fists on women," Mitchell replied. A tense silence followed. "You're outnumbered, Ryder," Blackwater called finally. "We're coming in to get her. Last chance to step aside." Mitchell positioned himself more firmly beside the door. "I reckon you'll find that harder than you think." The first shot shattered the cabin's single window, sending Penelope diving for cover. Mitchell dropped to a crouch as more bullets splintered the door and walls. "Stay down," he shouted to Penelope over the gunfire. "Like hell," she replied, crawling to position herself behind the overturned table. She raised the Winchester and fired through the broken window, the report deafening in the small space. Outside, a horse screamed in pain, followed by a man's curse. The shooting paused momentarily. "You hit one?" Mitchell asked. "The horse," Penelope confirmed grimly. "Not a killing shot, but enough to throw the rider." Mitchell risked a glance through a crack in the door planks. One of Blackwater's men was indeed on the ground, scrambling for cover as his injured horse bolted. Blackwater and the 3rd man had taken positions behind rocks at the edge of the clearing. "They're split up now," Mitchell said. "That gives us an advantage." The gunfire resumed, more carefully placed this time. Mitchell returned fire through the door crack, aiming to keep Blackwater and his remaining companion pinned down. "We just need to hold out until they run low on ammunition," he told Penelope. "They can't lay siege to us forever." As if in answer to his words, a new sound reached them, the distant thunder of multiple horses approaching fast from the direction of the rocking R. "Riders coming," Penelope said, hope evident in her voice. "Ranch hands," Mitchell confirmed, recognizing the pattern of hoofbeats. They would have heard the shooting. Outside, Blackwater seemed to realize their situation had changed. "This ain't over," he shouted. "Tell Penelope her father won't give up so easily." The sound of retreating horses told Mitchell that Blackwater and his unwounded companion were fleeing, leaving their third man behind. Moments later, 5 riders from the rocking R thundered into the clearing, rifles drawn. Mitchell recognized Joseph Davis at their head, the ranch owner's silver hair visible beneath his hat. "Mitchell, you in there?" Joseph called. Mitchell opened the door, keeping his revolver ready. "Here, boss, with company." Joseph dismounted, eyeing the stranger cowering behind a rock with his hands raised. "Seems like you've had an eventful journey home," he observed dryly. "Want to tell me why you're shooting up my line shack?" Mitchell gestured for Penelope to join him at the door. "Joseph Davis, this is Penelope Campbell. She's in need of sanctuary." The men pursuing her work for her father. Joseph's weathered face remained impassive as he studied Penelope, noting her bruised face and the determined set of her jaw. Finally, he nodded. "Any enemies of yours are enemies of the rocking R, Mitchell, you know that." Relief washed through Mitchell. "Thank you, sir." Joseph turned to his men. "Pete, Jake, secure that fellow and bring him along. Done, ride ahead and let Mrs. Hollies know we'll have a guest at the ranch house." He looked back at Mitchell. "I expect a full explanation once we're home." As they prepared to ride the final distance to the ranch, Penelope touched Mitchell's arm. "You called it home," she said quietly, "earlier on the ridge." Mitchell met her gaze, unable to deny it. "Guess I did." "Thank you," she said, "for everything." Something in her eyes made Mitchell's carefully constructed defenses waver. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to wonder if his belief about attachment and survival on the frontier might be wrong, if perhaps connection wasn't a liability but a source of strength. "We should go," he said, not yet ready to examine these thoughts too closely. "It's been a long day." Together, they mounted their horses and joined the rocking R men for the journey home. The rocking R main house stood 2 stories tall, built of solid logs with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Unlike many frontier ranches that grew haphazardly as means allowed, Joseph Davis had planned his home carefully from the beginning, creating a structure that was both practical and impressive. Mrs. Hollies, the housekeeper who had managed the domestic affairs of the ranch since Joseph's wife died, met them at the door. A tall, spare woman with iron-gray hair and kind eyes, she immediately took charge of Penelope. "Land sakes, child, you look like you've been through the wars," she clucked, leading Penelope toward the stairs. "Let's get you cleaned up and settled. I've prepared the east bedroom, best light in the house, and a view of the mountains." Mitchell watched as Penelope was whisked away, feeling strangely bereft. He had grown accustomed to her presence during their journey more quickly than he would have thought possible. Joseph clapped a hand on his shoulder. "My study, Mitchell, we need to talk." In the book-lined room that served as Joseph's office, Mitchell recounted the events at Clearwater Station and their journey home. Joseph listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or frowning as the tale unfolded. "Harlan Campbell," he said when Mitchell finished. "I know the name, big operation over in Bitterroot. Man's got political connections all the way to the territorial governor." Mitchell tensed. "Will that be a problem?" Joseph considered for a moment. "Could be, but I've never been one to turn away someone in genuine need, especially not a woman fleeing abuse." He fixed Mitchell with a penetrating look. "You're sure about this girl's story?" "I saw the Bruises, old and new," Mitchell replied, "and I've developed a good sense for when someone's lying she isn't." "You seem mighty certain for someone who's known her less than 2 days," Joseph observed mildly. Mitchell shifted uncomfortably, "Just calling it as I see it." Joseph's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. I've known you since you were a green kid of 19, Mitchell, never seen you take such an immediate interest in anyone's welfare before. It's not, Mitchell began then stopped. He wasn't entirely sure what it wasn't or what it was. She needed help, he said finally. I was there. Joseph hummed noncommittally. Well, she's welcome here as long as she needs sanctuary. I'll put her to work helping Mrs. Hollies if she's willing. No charity, she'll earn her keep. Thank you, sir. As Mitchell turned to leave, Joseph added, one more thing. The prisoner we brought in, Jake's got him locked in the tack room for now. Thought you might want to have a word with him before we decide what to do. Mitchell nodded. I'll see what he knows. The man from Blackwater's party sat on a saddle rack in the tack room, hands tied before him, a sullen expression on his face. He was younger than Mitchell had expected, perhaps no more than 22, with sandy hair and a patchy attempt at a beard. What's your name? Mitchell asked, closing the door behind him. Tim Reeves, the young man muttered. Look, I was just doing a job. Blackwater hired me yesterday, said it was just to bring some rancher's daughter home. Did he mention why she left home in the first place? Tim shrugged. Not my business to ask. It became your business when you started shooting at us, Mitchell pointed out evenly. The young man had the grace to look ashamed. Blackwater said to follow his lead. I didn't know it would come to gunplay. What's Campbell paying for his daughter's return? Don't know about that. Blackwater offered me $20 to help track and retrieve her, said it would be easy money. Tim gave a bitter laugh. So much for that. Mitchell studied him, weighing the young man's sincerity. Where was Blackwater headed after he left you behind? Said something about regrouping, getting more men. He was headed west, back toward Bitterroot, I reckon. This confirmed Mitchell's fears. Blackwater wouldn't give up so easily, not with his reputation and payment at stake. You've got two choices, Reeves, Mitchell said. You can ride out of here tomorrow and keep riding until you're clear of Montana territory, or you can face charges for the attack today. Tim's head jerked up. You'd let me go. Against my better judgment, yes. But if I ever see you again, or if I learn you've helped Blackwater or Campbell against Miss Penelope, I'll hunt you down myself. Understand? The young man nodded vigorously. Yes, sir. I'll be on the first stage east tomorrow, I swear it. Mitchell believed him. One more thing, what else do you know about Campbell's plans for his daughter? Tim hesitated. Not much. But Blackwater mentioned something about the wedding being important for some kind of business merger. Campbell and this Williamson fellow have some deal that depends on the marriage going through. This was useful information. If Penelope was valuable to her father for business reasons, it might explain his determination to retrieve her. Mitchell left the tack room, instructing Jake to keep Reeves under guard overnight and provide him with food and water. The young cowboy had made a poor choice in employers, but Mitchell saw little benefit in harsh punishment. Evening had fallen by the time Mitchell completed his regular duties and returned to the main house. Mrs. Hollies was setting the dining table when he entered, the delicious aroma of beef stew filling the air. There you are, she said, gesturing toward the washstand by the back door. Clean up and sit down. Food's ready. As Mitchell washed trailed dust from his hands and face, Penelope entered from the stairway. She had bathed and changed into a simple dress borrowed from Mrs. Hollies' niece who occasionally visited the ranch. Her honey-blonde hair was neatly braided and draped over one shoulder. The bruise on her cheek remained visible, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. Mitchell found himself momentarily speechless. Even in borrowed clothes, there was something regal about her presence that commanded attention. Miss Campbell, he managed finally, you're looking well. A smile touched her lips. Much improved thanks to Mrs. Hollies, and please, after everything we've been through, I think Penelope would be appropriate. Joseph joined them from his study, and they settled around the table. As they ate, the conversation remained carefully neutral, Joseph asking Penelope about her journey, Mrs. Hollies commenting on the spring weather, Mitchell reporting on the strays he'd recovered before reaching Clearwater Station. Only after the meal, when Mrs. Hollies had retired to her quarters and Joseph had excused himself to his study, did Mitchell and Penelope find themselves alone on the porch, watching as twilight deepened over the valley. You're Mr. Davis seems like a good man, Penelope said, breaking the comfortable silence. He is, Mitchell agreed, fairest man I've ever worked for. He's more than an employer to you. Mitchell considered this, in some ways. My own father died when I was young, Joseph, he's provided guidance when I needed it. Penelope leaned against the porch railing, studying him. You don't talk much about your past. Not much to tell, Mitchell replied automatically, then sighed. That's not entirely true, I just don't usually see the point in dwelling on it. To his surprise, Penelope didn't press. Instead, she gazed out at the darkening landscape. This is beautiful country, she said softly. I can see why you returned here. Mitchell followed her gaze. The mountains stood in silhouette against the fading light and the first stars had begun to appear. It gets in your blood, he admitted. I spoke with Mrs. Holly's about helping in the house, Penelope said after a moment. She seems pleased to have an extra pair of hands. Joseph mentioned he'd offer you work. You're comfortable with that arrangement. Penelope nodded. More than comfortable, I'm grateful. She turned to face him fully. But I know I can't stay here indefinitely. My father won't give up so easily. Blackwater will be back, Mitchell agreed, with more men next time. Then I should leave as soon as possible. I won't bring danger to people who have shown me kindness. Mitchell felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. Running alone isn't the answer. Campbell has the resources to keep tracking you no matter where you go. What alternative do I have? Frustration edged her voice. I won't return to marry Garrett Williamson. I won't be treated as property to be traded for business advantage. Mitchell's hands tightened on the porch railing. No one's suggesting that. But there must be a better solution than endless flight. Penelope was quiet for a long moment. What would you do if you were in my position? The question caught Mitchell off guard. He had spent so many years avoiding entanglements, solving problems by moving on rather than standing firm, yet something about Penelope made him want to fight rather than flee. I'd find a way to make Campbell back down, he said slowly. Everyone has vulnerabilities, even powerful men. My father doesn't respond to threats, Penelope said. And I have no leverage against him. Maybe not directly, Mitchell admitted, but from what I gathered from Reeves, this marriage is tied to a business arrangement, if we could disrupt that somehow. Penelope's eyes widened. The water rights, she breathed, of course. Water rights. The Williamson property controls access to the river that feeds my father's northern pastures, she explained. They've had an informal agreement for years, but last winter there was a dispute. This marriage was meant to formalize their partnership and guarantee my father's water access permanently. Mitchell whistled softly. Water rights are as good as gold out here. No wonder he's so determined. If the Williamsons pulled out of the deal, Penelope began, your father might decide you're not worth the trouble, Mitchell finished. Hope flickered in Penelope's eyes. But how do we convince the Williamsons to withdraw? Mitchell had no immediate answer. This kind of strategic thinking was far removed from his usual concerns of cattle, weather, and trail conditions. Yet for Penelope's sake he found himself stretching beyond his customary limitations. We need more information, he said finally, and time to consider our options. Penelope nodded, visibly tired despite her determination. You're right, I should rest while I can. As she turned to go inside, Mitchell impulsively reached for her hand. Penelope, he said, the name feeling right on his tongue. I meant what I said earlier, no one will harm you again. Not while I'm around. Her fingers tightened briefly around his. I believe you, she said simply. Good night, Mitchell. Long after she had gone inside, Mitchell remained on the porch, contemplating the stars and the unfamiliar feelings stirring within him. For the first time in years, he found himself wanting more than just survival, wanting connection, purpose, perhaps even a future that included someone else. The thought terrified him almost as much as it exhilarated him. Days at the Rocking R followed a predictable rhythm. Mitchell rose before dawn, worked with the cattle and horses until dusk, took his meals at the bunkhouse with the other hands, and occasionally visited the main house in the evenings. It was a life that suited him, demanding physical labor that left little time for brooding, with just enough human contact to avoid loneliness without risking deep attachment. Yet in the week following Penelope's arrival, Mitchell found his routine disrupted in ways both small and profound. He began taking his noon meals at the main house rather than in the field. His evening visits grew more frequent. He found reasons to ride past the kitchen garden where Penelope often worked alongside Mrs. Holly's. The other hands noticed, of course. Cowboys were observant by nature and merciless in their teasing. "Never seen a man so interested in vegetables before," Jake commented one evening as they returned from checking fence lines. "Might have something to do with who's planting them, I reckon." Mitchell ignored the good-natured ribbing, but he couldn't deny the truth behind it. He was drawn to Penelope in a way he had never experienced. Her quiet strength, her quick mind, her resilience in the face of adversity, all fascinated him. Each day revealed new facets of her character that only deepened his admiration. For her part, Penelope seemed to blossom at the rocking R. The bruises on her face faded, and with them, some of the wariness in her eyes. She threw herself into work with surprising enthusiasm for someone raised in relative privilege, earning Mrs. Holly's approval and Joseph's respect. In the evenings, they often sat together on the porch, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying the companionable silence as darkness settled over the valley. Mitchell found himself sharing stories he had never told anyone, about his parents' struggles on their failed homestead, about the years after their deaths when he drifted from ranch to ranch, taking whatever work he could find. "How did you first come to the rocking R?" Penelope asked one such evening, a blanket draped around her shoulders against the spring chill. Mitchell smiled at the memory. "Pure chance. I was 19, broke and hungry. Rode in looking for a few days' work to earn a meal. Joseph needed an extra hand for spring branding. I stayed the season." "Then left," she prompted. "Then left," he confirmed. "Got restless, I suppose, or scared." "Scared of what?" Mitchell hesitated, then admitted, "Of belonging somewhere, of caring about people who might leave or die like my parents did." Penelope considered this. "And when you came back 3 years ago?" "I'd tried my hand at everything from mining to freight hauling. Nothing felt right. One day I realized the closest thing to home I'd ever known was this valley." He shrugged. "So I came back, half expecting Joseph to turn me away. Instead, he acted like I'd just been gone on a long errand." "He cares about you," Penelope observed. "I know," Mitchell said softly. "Took me a while to accept that." Their conversations weren't all personal revelations, however. They also discussed Penelope's situation, strategizing how to counter her father's determination to retrieve her. "I've been thinking about the water rights issue," Mitchell said during one such discussion. "If we could find evidence that Williamson's claim isn't as solid as he pretends." "My father's study contains all the legal documents relating to property boundaries," Penelope replied. "But we'd need access to them." "What about your aunt in Helena? Could she help?" Penelope shook her head. "Aunt Margaret has always been afraid of my father. She wouldn't defy him openly." Their planning remained theoretical, constrained by distance and lack of information. Yet the process itself seemed to give Penelope comfort, a sense that she wasn't merely fleeing but working toward a solution. As the days passed, Mitchell found himself increasingly troubled by the way Penelope had begun to fit into life at the rocking R and into his own carefully ordered existence. The fortress of independence he had built around his heart was developing cracks, and the prospect both thrilled and terrified him. On the 10th day after their arrival, everything changed. Mitchell was repairing a section of fence in the north pasture when Pete, one of the younger hands, rode up at a gallop. "Riders coming," Pete announced, reining in his lathered horse. "At least 6 men, armed, heading up from the south road. Joseph sent me to find you." Mitchell's stomach nodded. "Blackwater?" "Don't know," Pete replied, "but Joseph says to hurry back." Mitchell swung onto Thunder's back, leaving his tools where they lay. "Anyone else with Joseph at the house?" "Just Mrs. Holly's and Miss Campbell. Most of the boys are out with the herd in the west pasture." They rode hard, cutting across the valley toward the ranch buildings. As they approached, Mitchell could see the dust cloud raised by the approaching riders, still a mile or so distant. Joseph waited on the porch, rifle in hand, Recognized Blackwater through the glass, he said grimly as Mitchell dismounted. Got 5 men with him, all armed. Mitchell nodded. Where's Penelope? Inside with Mrs. Hollies. I've told them to be ready to leave out the back if necessary. Mitchell checked his revolver. We're outnumbered. For now, Joseph agreed. I've sent word to the other hands. They'll be here within the hour. Might be too late by then. Joseph's weathered face was calm. We'll handle what comes. As the riders approached the final stretch of road leading to the ranch house, Mitchell felt a strange clarity descend over him. In that moment, he realized 2 things with absolute certainty. He would die before he let anyone hurt Penelope again, and somewhere along their journey, he had fallen in love with her. The revelation should have shaken him. Instead, it steadied him, giving purpose to his fear and determination to his resolve. The front door opened, and Penelope stepped out onto the porch. She had changed from her work dress into riding clothes, and her hair was tied back in a simple braid. Mitchell noticed with surprise that she carried a pistol, one of Joseph's smaller revolvers, tucked into her belt. You should wait inside, he told her, concern evident in his voice. No, she replied firmly. I won't hide while others face danger on my behalf. Before Mitchell could argue further, the riders pulled up in the yard. Blackwater sat in the center, his scarred face set in a triumphant smirk. Beside him rode a man who bore such a strong resemblance to Penelope that Mitchell knew immediately it must be Harlan Campbell. Campbell was a large man in his 50s, expensively dressed despite the dust of the trail. His hair, once the same honey blonde as his daughter's, had faded to gray at the temples. He sat his horse with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. Behind them, a third man caught Mitchell's attention, younger, perhaps 30, with a handsome face marred by cold eyes and a cruel mouth. Something in his possessive gaze as it fixed on Penelope told Mitchell this must be Garrett Williamson, the fiancé she had fled. Joseph Davis, Campbell called, his voice carrying easily across the yard. I believe you're harboring my daughter. Joseph stepped forward, his rifle held casually but ready. Miss Campbell is a guest at the Rocking R, Mr. Campbell. She's here of her own free will. Campbell's expression hardened. She's a confused young woman who belongs at home with her family. I've come to take her back. I'm not confused, Father, Penelope called, her voice remarkably steady. I'm perfectly clear about not wanting to marry a man who beats women. Williamson flushed with anger. You exaggerate, Penelope. A man has the right to discipline his household. Is that what you call this? Mitchell stepped forward, gesturing to Penelope's face where faint traces of the bruises remained visible. Discipline. Campbell's eyes shifted to Mitchell, narrowing with contempt. And you must be the cowboy who's been interfering in family matters. Blackwater told me about you. Name's Mitchell Ryder, Mitchell replied evenly, and where I come from men don't hit women regardless of family connections. How I raise my daughter is none of your concern, Ryder. It became my concern when your man attacked her at Clearwater Station. Campbell glanced at Blackwater, who shifted uncomfortably. I instructed Jeb to bring her home safely, not to harm her. That's not how it looked to me, Mitchell said. The tension in the yard was palpable. Mitchell was acutely aware that they were still outnumbered, and while Joseph was a formidable presence, they couldn't count on the other hands arriving in time if shooting started. Campbell seemed to reach a decision. I didn't come here to argue with hired help, he said dismissively. Penelope, gather your things, we're leaving. I'm not going with you, Father, Penelope replied. Not now, not ever. Don't be foolish, girl. Where will you go? What will you do? You have no money, no prospects. She has a place here, Mitchell found himself saying, surprising everyone, including himself. For as long as she wants it. Williamson gave a derisive laugh. As what, a ranch hand's woman, is that what you've reduced yourself to, Penelope? Mitchell's hand tightened on his revolver, but Penelope spoke before he could respond. I'd rather be a ranch hand's woman than a trophy wife who serves as a business transaction, she said, her voice cold. At least here I'm respected. Campbell's face flushed with anger. I've had enough of this nonsense. Blackwater, get her. Blackwater hesitated, looking from Campbell to the armed men on the porch. Sir, there. Now, Blackwater, Campbell barked. As Blackwater reluctantly dismounted, reaching for his gun, the sound of hoofbeats drew everyone's attention. From the west pasture, a dozen rocking hands appeared, riding hard toward the house. Leading them was Jake, rifle raised and ready. The odds had suddenly shifted. Campbell assessed the situation quickly. "This isn't over," he said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "Penelope, you're making a terrible mistake. The Campbell name means something in this territory. Without my protection, you'll find life very difficult indeed." "I'll take my chances," Penelope replied steadily. Campbell's eyes shifted to Mitchell. "And you, Cowboy, you've made an enemy today. Men who cross me tend to regret it." Mitchell met his gaze without flinching. "I've faced worse than rich men with wounded pride." For a moment, it seemed Campbell might order an attack despite the arrival of reinforcements. Then Williamson leaned over and spoke quietly in his ear. Whatever he said caused Campbell to reconsider. "Mount up," he ordered Blackwater. "We're leaving." To Joseph, he added, "Davis, you're harboring a runaway daughter against her father's wishes. There will be consequences." Joseph's weathered face remained impassive. "Mr. Campbell, I don't take kindly to threats on my property. I suggest you leave while you still can." The rocking hands had formed a semicircle behind Campbell's party, effectively surrounding them. Campbell recognized the precariousness of his position and gave a curt nod. "This isn't the end," he promised, turning his horse. "Penelope, when you come to your senses, you know where to find me." They watched in tense silence as Campbell's party rode away, Blackwater and Williamson casting dark glances back at the ranch house. Only when the riders had disappeared beyond the bend in the road did Mitchell allow himself to breathe normally again. Joseph lowered his rifle. "Well, that could have gone worse." "It's not over," Penelope said quietly. "My father doesn't give up when he's set on something." "We'll be ready," Joseph assured her, then turned to address the assembled ranch hands. "Pete, Jake, set up a watch rotation. I want eyes on the approaches to the ranch at all times. The rest of you back to work, but keep your weapons close." As the men dispersed, Mitchell moved to Penelope's side. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her face was pale. "I never thought he'd come himself. Usually he sends others to do his unpleasant tasks." "Shows how important this marriage is to him," Mitchell observed. "Important enough that he'll try again," Penelope agreed. "And next time he'll be better prepared." That evening, after a subdued dinner, Joseph summoned Mitchell and Penelope to his study. The ranch owner's expression was grave as he poured 3 glasses of whiskey and handed them around. "I've been thinking about your situation," he said to Penelope. "Campbell was right about one thing: he has influence in this territory. If he decides to use legal means to retrieve you, claiming you're mentally unfit or some such nonsense, he might find a sympathetic judge." Penelope's fingers tightened around her glass. "I'm of legal age, he can't force me to return." "Law's one thing," Joseph replied. "Application of it is another, especially when money and power are involved." Mitchell took a small sip of whiskey, feeling the burn down his throat. "What are you suggesting?" Joseph leaned back in his chair. "I think you two should leave the territory, at least until this blows over." Mitchell stared at him in surprise. "Leave?" "Just temporarily," Joseph assured him. "I have a sister in Colorado, runs a boarding house in Denver. She could use help, and she's discreet enough not to ask too many questions." "You'd send me away from the rocking R?" Mitchell asked, an unexpected pain lancing through him. The ranch had become home in a way he hadn't fully appreciated until now. Joseph's eyes were kind. "Not sending you away, son, giving you a mission. Miss Campbell needs protection, and there's no one I trust more for that job." Penelope looked between the two men. "I can't ask Mitchell to leave his home because of me." "You're not asking," Mitchell said quietly, "and Joseph's right, it's the safest option right now." Joseph nodded approval. "I'll give you funds enough to establish yourselves." "Mitchell, I'll hold your position here for when you return." "When would we leave?" Penelope asked. "Tomorrow, before dawn," Joseph replied. "Take the north trail through the mountains. Campbell will expect you to head south toward Helena." As they discussed practical details, supplies, routes, letters of introduction, Mitchell felt a strange mixture of emotions. Leaving the rocking R was painful, yet the prospect of facing this new challenge with Penelope stirred something like excitement. For the first time in years, he was choosing to act rather than react, to protect rather than withdraw. Later, as they walked together toward the bunkhouse where Mitchell needed to gather his few possessions, Penelope broke the contemplative silence. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. "I could go to Denver alone." Mitchell stopped, turning to face her in the starlight. "Is that what you want?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, but I don't want you to resent me for taking you from your home." "I don't resent you, Penelope." The words seemed inadequate for the depth of his feelings, but they were all he could manage. "And home isn't always a place." Her eyes searched his face, looking for meaning behind his cryptic statement. Whatever she saw there made her reach for his hand, her fingers twining with his in the darkness. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Mitchell wanted to say more, to explain the revelation he'd had during the confrontation with her father, to tell her how she had begun to dismantle the walls he'd built around his heart. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently. "Get some rest," he said. "We leave at first light." They departed as planned, slipping away from the ranch before dawn painted the eastern sky. Joseph saw them off, providing fresh horses, supplies, and a sealed letter for his sister in Denver. The old rancher embraced Mitchell before they mounted. "Take care of her," he said quietly, "and yourself." "I will," Mitchell promised. "Thank you for understanding." Joseph's eyes twinkled with unexpected humor. "Oh, I understand more than you think, son." Before Mitchell could question this cryptic remark, the ranch owner had turned to Penelope, handing her a small leather pouch. "Emergency funds," he explained. "Independent of what I gave Mitchell, a woman should always have resources of her own." Penelope's eyes glistened with tears. "Your kindness is practical, not sentimental," Joseph interrupted gruffly. "Just come back when it's safe and help Mrs. Hollies with the preserves. Woman's been complaining about doing it alone for years." They rode north as the sun crested the mountains, following game trails through terrain Mitchell knew well from hunting expeditions. By midday, they had crossed into the high country where even Campbell's best trackers would struggle to follow. Penelope rode confidently, adapting to the challenging terrain without complaint. Mitchell found himself watching her more often than was strictly necessary for safety, admiring the graceful way she handled her mount and the determined set of her jaw as they navigated difficult passages. "You ride well for a rancher's daughter," he commented during a brief rest to water the horses. Penelope smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "My mother taught me when I was young. She believed a woman should be able to go her own way, if necessary." "Sounds like a wise woman." "She was," a shadow crossed Penelope's features. "After she died, my father changed, became harder, more controlling. The marriage to Williamson was the final proof that he no longer saw me as a person, just a commodity to be traded for business advantage." Mitchell untied his canteen, offering it to her. "Your mother would be proud of you now, taking charge of your own life." "I hope so." Penelope took a sip, then returned the canteen. "Though I'm not sure fleeing qualifies as taking charge." "You stood your ground yesterday," Mitchell reminded her. "Faced down your father and Williamson without flinching. That took courage." She studied him with those perceptive green eyes. "Why are you doing this, Mitchell? Truly, you could have stayed at the Rocking R, let me go to Denver alone." The question deserved an honest answer, yet Mitchell struggled to articulate feelings he was only beginning to understand himself. "At first I helped because it was the right thing to do," he said slowly, "then because Joseph asked me to. And now—" Mitchell met her gaze directly. "Now I'm here because I want to be. Because the thought of you facing this alone," he trailed off, then finished simply, "I can't let that happen." Something shifted in Penelope's expression, a softening, a recognition. She stepped closer, close enough that Mitchell could see the faint freckles across her nose, the last traces of bruising along her jawline. "Thank you for seeing me," she said softly. "Not as Campbell's daughter or Williamson's intended, but as myself." Mitchell felt drawn toward her, the space between them charged with unspoken possibility. For a moment, he thought he might bridge that final distance, might finally express with actions what he struggled to say with words. A distant sound, the crack of a branch breaking under weight, shattered the moment. Mitchell's hand went instinctively to his revolver as he scanned the forest around them. "Someone's following," he said quietly. Penelope tensed. "My father. Too soon for him to have tracked us this far." Mitchell moved to his horse, checking that his rifle was secure in its scabbard. "More likely local hunter or trapper. Or Blackwater guessed our route." Mitchell considered this, possible but unlikely. "Still, we shouldn't linger." They mounted quickly, continuing along the trail at a faster pace. Mitchell kept alert, watching for signs of pursuit, but the forest remained quiet save for natural sounds. By evening, he was reasonably convinced they weren't being followed after all. The noise had likely been wildlife. They made camp in a sheltered hollow beside a small stream. Mitchell built a fire while Penelope prepared a simple meal from their provisions. The domestic tranquility of the scene struck Mitchell forcefully. How natural it felt to work alongside her, how the silence between them had grown comfortable rather than awkward. After they had eaten, they sat side by side near the fire, the night chill encouraging proximity. The stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, brilliant in the clear mountain air. "I've been thinking about Denver," Penelope said, breaking the companionable silence, "about what I might do there." "Joseph's sister will help you find your feet," Mitchell assured her. "Yes, but I need more than temporary sanctuary. I need a way to support myself permanently." She turned to face him, her expression earnest in the firelight. "I've been educated better than most women in the territory. I can read, write, keep accounts. I could be a teacher, perhaps, or work in a shop." Mitchell nodded, trying to ignore the slight ache her words caused. She was planning a future in Denver, a future that might not include him once his protective role ended. "You'll find your place," he said, meaning it despite his mixed emotions. "You're capable and determined. Those qualities count for more than fancy education in the West." Penelope studied him thoughtfully. "And you? Will you return to the Rocking R once I'm safely established?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither had fully addressed. Mitchell poked at the fire, watching sparks rise toward the stars. "Joseph said he'd hold my position," he said, not quite answering her question. "Is that what you want?" Mitchell considered carefully before responding. "A week ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. The Rocking R is the closest thing to home I've known since my parents died." And now, Penelope's voice was soft, patient. Mitchell looked up from the fire, meeting her gaze directly. "Now I'm not so sure. The past days have changed things." "What things?" "My thinking about what matters, about whether a man needs roots or can keep drifting indefinitely." He hesitated, then added, "About whether being alone is really safer than being connected to someone." Penelope's eyes widened slightly at his implicit meaning. "And what have you concluded?" Mitchell struggled to find words for feelings he had spent years avoiding. "I haven't fully figured it out yet," he admitted, "but I know I'm tired of running from attachment because I fear losing it. That's not really living, it's just existing." A log in the fire collapsed, sending up a shower of sparks. In the momentary flare of light, Mitchell saw something in Penelope's eyes that gave him courage. "When I saw you at Clearwater Station," he continued, "something happened that I didn't expect. You got under my skin somehow, made me want to protect you, yes, but more than that, made me want to know you. To understand what makes you brave enough to leave everything familiar for an uncertain future." Penelope's hand found his in the darkness. Perhaps the same thing that makes a young cowboy return to the one place that felt like home, despite his fear of attachment. Mitchell's fingers closed around hers. "Perhaps." They sat in silence for a time, hands joined, each absorbed in private thoughts. Eventually, Penelope spoke again. "I won't ask you to abandon the life you've built for my sake, Mitchell." "I know," he replied. "That's one of the things I admire about you." The conversation shifted to practical matters, their route for the following day, the towns they would avoid, the estimated time to reach Denver. Yet underneath the mundane details ran a current of unspoken possibility that neither was quite ready to address directly. As they prepared their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, Mitchell found himself thinking of Joseph's cryptic words at their departure. The old rancher had seen something developing between them before Mitchell himself had fully acknowledged it. Sleep came slowly that night, Mitchell's mind filled with thoughts of green eyes and honey-blonde hair, and the unfamiliar, exhilarating sensation of allowing himself to care deeply about another person's welfare, not out of duty or obligation, but from genuine attachment. The journey to Denver took 12 days, following a circuitous route designed to evade potential pursuit. They avoided main roads and larger settlements, staying instead at isolated farms or making camp in the wilderness. Mitchell remained vigilant, but no sign of Blackwater or other pursuers materialized. As they traveled, the relationship between them evolved in subtle ways. Physical proximity became more natural, helping each other across difficult terrain, sitting close by the fire at night, occasionally touching without conscious thought. Conversations deepened, ranging from childhood memories to hopes for the future, from philosophical debates to practical plans for life in Denver. Mitchell found himself sharing thoughts and feelings he had never expressed aloud before, about his parents' deaths, about the years of drifting from place to place, about his gradual recognition that the rocking R had become home despite his attempts to remain emotionally detached. In turn, Penelope revealed more of herself, her grief over her mother's death, her complicated relationship with her father, her determination to build a life based on her own choices rather than others' expectations. "I always thought I'd marry eventually," she confessed one evening as they sat beneath a vast canopy of stars. "But I wanted it to be someone of my choosing, someone who saw me as a partner, not a possession." Mitchell, leaning against his saddle nearby, nodded understanding. "My parents had that kind of marriage, equal partners facing the frontier together. When my mother died, my father, he just seemed to give up. Couldn't imagine continuing without her." "That's beautiful in a way," Penelope said softly. "Sad but beautiful." "It frightened me," Mitchell admitted. "Seeing how devastated he was made me think loving someone that much was dangerous, that it made you vulnerable." Penelope considered this. "It does make you vulnerable," she agreed, "but maybe that's the point. Maybe we're not meant to go through life armored against feeling." The words resonated with Mitchell, challenging beliefs he had held for years. Could it be that his avoidance of attachment wasn't wisdom but fear? That in trying to protect himself from pain, he had also cut himself off from the deepest forms of human connection? These reflections occupied his thoughts as they crossed the border into Colorado territory, the mountains giving way to rolling foothills and eventually the broader plain where Denver had established itself as a growing hub of commerce. They arrived on a sunny afternoon, the city sprawling before them in a mix of elegant brick buildings and hastily constructed wooden structures that spoke of rapid expansion. Joseph's directions led them to a 3-story boarding house on a respectable street not far from the commercial district. Martha Davis Turner, Joseph's sister, proved to be cut from the same straightforward cloth as her brother. A handsome widow in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating eyes, she welcomed them without excessive questions, accepting Joseph's letter as sufficient explanation. "My brother says you need quiet accommodation and possible employment," she said after reading the sealed message. "I can provide both, room on the 3rd floor, small but private, and I need help managing this place. Bookkeeping, marketing, general oversight when I'm occupied elsewhere." Penelope nodded gratefully. "I'm experienced with household accounts and management, Mrs. Turner." "Martha, please, and you, Mr. Ryder." "My brother speaks highly of your capabilities." Mitchell shifted uncomfortably. "I'm more accustomed to outdoor work, ma'am." Martha assessed him with a knowing gaze reminiscent of her brother's. "My handyman left last month. Roof needs repair, porches sagging, winter wood needs splitting. Plenty to keep you occupied if you're interested." The offer presented Mitchell with a decision he had been postponing throughout the journey. Staying in Denver meant committing to a path away from the rocking R, away from the life he had built there. Yet the thought of returning to Montana while Penelope remained in Colorado created an ache in his chest he couldn't ignore. "I'd be obliged for the work," he said finally, "at least until things are settled." Martha nodded, seemingly satisfied. "You'll take the room at the end of the hall then. Now I imagine you're both tired and hungry after your journey. Wash up, rest, and come down for supper at 6. We can discuss details tomorrow." After she departed, Penelope turned to Mitchell, her expression questioning. "You're staying?" Mitchell met her gaze steadily. "For now. Until I'm sure you're safe." She studied him, perhaps sensing there was more to his decision than he had expressed. "Thank you," she said simply. Their lives quickly fell into a new routine. Penelope proved invaluable to Martha, bringing order to the boarding house's chaotic bookkeeping and suggesting improvements that increased both efficiency and comfort. Mitchell turned his hands to the many repairs the aging building required, working from dawn until dusk with the same dedication he had shown at the Rocking R in the evenings. They often walked together through the growing city, marveling at its energy and diversity after the relative isolation of ranch life. Denver in 1882 was a place of contrasts, elegant mansions rising within sight of rough saloons, cultured society ladies sharing sidewalks with frontier scouts, the trappings of Eastern civilization existing alongside the rawer elements of Western expansion. For Penelope, who had never traveled beyond Montana territory, the city represented both liberation and opportunity. She absorbed new experiences eagerly, from attending a theatrical performance to visiting the territorial library. Mitchell watched her blossom with quiet pride, though each new connection she formed in Denver reminded him that her future here might eventually exclude him. A month passed with no sign of pursuit from Campbell or his men. Mitchell maintained vigilance out of habit, but gradually the immediate sense of danger receded. Penelope began to speak of Denver as home, to make plans that extended beyond temporary sanctuary. Martha, observant and discreet, seemed to understand the unspoken dynamics between them better than they did themselves. She created opportunities for them to work together, assigned them complementary tasks, and occasionally made pointed remarks about the foolishness of denying obvious truths. "My brother always said you were stubborn," she told Mitchell one afternoon as he replaced damaged shingles on the roof. "I'm beginning to think he understated the case." Mitchell looked up from his work. "Ma'am, that girl looks at you like you hung the moon and you at her the same way, yet here you both are, dancing around each other like skittish colts." Heat rose in Mitchell's face. "It's complicated." Martha snorted. "Only because you're making it so. Joseph wrote me the whole story, about her father, about your intervention, about your history of avoiding attachment. But he also wrote that he's never seen you look at anyone the way you look at her." Mitchell carefully set down his hammer. "Joseph has an active imagination." "Joseph has clear eyes and good sense," Martha countered. "As do I. You care for that young woman, Mitchell Ryder. The question is whether you have the courage to do something about it before she concludes you don't and turns her attention elsewhere." The blunt assessment struck uncomfortably close to Mitchell's own fears. He had noticed other men's appreciative glances when he and Penelope walked together in the evenings, educated men, businessmen, the kind who could offer her security and social standing he could not. "She deserves better than a ranch hand with no prospects," he said quietly. Martha's expression softened. "That girl has had her fill of better prospects according to others' definitions. Why not let her decide what she deserves?" The conversation haunted Mitchell in the days that followed. He found himself watching Penelope more intently, noting the confidence with which she now moved through her new life, the quiet authority she had developed in managing the boarding house alongside Martha. She was no longer simply the frightened young woman he had rescued at Clearwater Station. She had become a capable, independent person building a life on her own terms. And yet, amid her growing self-assurance, he occasionally caught her looking at him with an expression that made his heart race, a mixture of affection, uncertainty, and yearning that mirrored his own conflicted feelings. The pivotal moment came on a Sunday afternoon in late June, nearly 2 months after their arrival in Denver. They had taken advantage of the free day to explore a city park, enjoying the summer warmth and the novelty of structured gardens after the wild beauty of Montana. As they sat on a bench beneath a flowering tree, watching families stroll along carefully laid paths, Penelope broke their comfortable silence. "I received a letter yesterday," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "from Mrs. Holly's at the Rocking R." Mitchell turned to her, surprised. "Good news, I hope." "Mixed," Penelope replied. "It seems my father has finally accepted that I won't return willingly." He's apparently telling acquaintances that I've gone east to further my education, a face-saving fiction. That is good news, Mitchell said, relief evident in his voice. It means you're safe here. Penelope nodded, though her expression remained serious. There's more. The business arrangement with Williamson has collapsed. Without the marriage to cement their partnership, they've become competitors rather than allies. Mitchell absorbed this information. So Campbell no longer has a financial incentive to force your return. Exactly. Penelope turned to face him fully. Mitchell, it means I'm truly free to stay in Denver to build a life here without looking over my shoulder. The joy in her voice was unmistakable, and Mitchell found himself smiling in response, even as a faint melancholy touched him. Her freedom, while unquestionably positive, also removed the last practical reason for his continued presence in Denver. I'm happy for you, he said sincerely. You deserve that freedom. Penelope studied him, her green eyes searching his face. There's one more thing in the letter. Joseph asked about you, about when you plan to return to the rocking R. Mrs. Hollis says they're short-handed with summer roundup approaching. The question Mitchell had been avoiding could no longer be postponed. With the threat from Campbell apparently resolved, his stated purpose for accompanying Penelope to Denver had been fulfilled. Logic and his prior commitment to Joseph suggested he should return to Montana. Yet the thought of leaving Penelope, of returning to the life he had known before meeting her, created a physical ache in his chest. In the weeks they had spent in Denver, his feelings for her had only deepened, transforming from protective concern to something far more profound. I should write to Joseph, he said carefully, let him know the situation has changed. And will you tell him you're coming back? Penelope's voice held a tension Mitchell hadn't heard since their confrontation with her father. Mitchell looked out across the park, gathering his courage. That depends, he said finally, on what? He turned back to her, knowing this was the moment to speak truth or forever hold his peace. On whether there's someone worth staying for. Penelope's breath caught audibly. Mitchell. I'm not good with words, he continued, determined to express what had been growing in his heart. Never have been, but these past months with you. They've changed me, Penelope, changed how I see the world, changed what I want from life. Her eyes never left his face. What do you want? I don't want to go back to just existing. To keeping people at a distance because I'm afraid of losing them. Mitchell took a deep breath. I want to build something real, something that matters, and I want to build it with you if you'll have me. Tears welled in Penelope's eyes. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Mitchell reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. I love you, Penelope Campbell. I think I started falling the moment I saw you stand up to Blackwater at Clearwater Station, bruised but unbroken. I'm not a wealthy man, I can't offer you the kind of life you were raised to expect, but I can promise you this, no one will ever harm you again, not while I draw breath. And no one will ever love you more honestly or completely than I do. A single tear traced down Penelope's cheek. I never wanted wealth or status, she whispered. I only wanted to be seen for myself, to be valued for who I am rather than what I represent. You gave me that gift from the beginning, Mitchell. She freed one hand to touch his face gently. I love you too. I've been afraid to say it, afraid you would see it as an obligation rather than the gift I meant it to be. Mitchell turned his face to press a kiss against her palm. Not an obligation, he said softly. The greatest privilege of my life. In the dappled sunlight of the Denver park, surrounded by the bustle of a growing city so different from the Montana wilderness where they had met, Mitchell Ryder finally allowed himself to embrace the truth he had been fighting for so long. That love wasn't a weakness to be feared but a strength to be cherished. That connection, to a person, to a place, to a shared future, was worth the risk of loss. As he leaned forward to kiss Penelope for the first time, tenderly mindful of the bruises that had long since faded from her face but remained in his memory as a promise made, Mitchell knew with absolute certainty that he had found his true home at last, not in a place, but in the heart of the remarkable woman who had taught him the courage to love again. Epilogue 3 months later. The aspens had turned golden on the slopes above the rocking R when Mitchell and Penelope rode through the ranch gate, side by side as they had been since leaving Clearwater Station 6 months earlier. Behind them followed a wagon carrying their modest possessions and wedding gifts from their friends in Denver. Joseph Davis stood on the porch, his weathered face breaking into a broad smile as he recognized the Ryders. Beside him, Mrs. Hollis wiped happy tears from her eyes with her apron corner. "Told you they'd be back before the first snow," Joseph said to her, his satisfaction evident. Mitchell dismounted first, then turned to help Penelope, his hands lingering respectfully at her waist. The plain gold band on his left hand caught the autumn sunlight as he steadied her. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ryder," Joseph called, descending the porch steps to meet them. Penelope's smile was radiant. "It's good to be home, Mr. Davis." The wedding had been simple but joyful, performed in Martha's boarding house parlor with a small gathering of friends they had made during their time in Denver. Martha had insisted on hosting a proper celebration, declaring that every bride deserved at least one perfect day, regardless of circumstances. They had debated remaining in Denver, where Penelope's capabilities had already earned her offers of employment beyond the boarding house. But as summer turned to fall, they found themselves increasingly drawn back to the Montana wilderness that had brought them together. When Joseph's letter arrived, offering Mitchell a promotion to foreman and the use of a small cabin on the property, the decision had been surprisingly easy. "Martha send you with those preserving recipes she promised, Mrs. Hollis asked Penelope after hugs had been exchanged all around. "An entire notebook," Penelope confirmed with a laugh, "and strict instructions to teach you her methods exactly as written." As the two women headed toward the house, already deep in discussion of canning techniques, Joseph clapped a hand on Mitchell's shoulder. "Married life agrees with you, son," he observed. "Never seen you looking so settled." Mitchell watched Penelope as she walked away, her honey-blonde hair gleaming in the sunlight. "Never felt so settled," he admitted. "It's a good feeling." "Any trouble on the journey?" Joseph asked, his tone more serious. Mitchell shook his head. "None. According to Martha's sources, Campbell's fully occupied with his water dispute with Williamson. Apparently, without the marriage connection, Williamson's claim to the river rights is much stronger than Campbell anticipated." Joseph chuckled. "Poetic justice, that. Man tried to use his daughter as a business transaction and lost both the daughter and the deal." They unloaded the wagon together, carrying Mitchell and Penelope's belongings to the foreman's cabin that would be their home. The small structure had been recently refurbished, the interior freshly whitewashed, new curtains at the windows, Mrs. Hollis's doing, no doubt. "It's not much," Joseph said as they set down the last of the crates. "But it's a start." Mitchell looked around the cabin, imagining it with Penelope's touches, imagining the life they would build here together. "It's more than enough," he said sincerely. That evening, after a celebratory dinner at the main house where the ranch hands welcomed them with good-natured teasing and genuine warmth, Mitchell and Penelope walked hand in hand to their new home. The first stars had appeared in the darkening sky, and a crescent moon hung low over the western mountains. On their small porch, Mitchell paused, drawing Penelope into his arms. "Happy?" he asked softly. She leaned into his embrace, her head resting naturally against his shoulder. "Completely," she murmured. "You." Mitchell thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, from that rainy day at Clearwater Station to the life stretching before them. He thought about the frightened young woman with bruises on her face and the strong, confident wife who now stood in his arms. He thought about his own transformation, from a man afraid to form attachments to one who had found the courage to love deeply and without reservation. "I never knew I could be this happy," he said honestly. "Never knew I could feel this, complete." Penelope lifted her face to his, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "That day at Clearwater Station, when you stepped between me and Blackwater, you promised no one would harm me again." "I meant it," Mitchell said, his voice low and fervent. "I know," she replied simply. "But what I didn't expect was everything else you would give me, a home, a future, a love I never dared hope for." As Mitchell lowered his lips to hers in the privacy of their porch, the Montana night settling around them like a benediction, he silently renewed the promise he had made that rainy day to protect her, to cherish her, to build with her a life founded on mutual respect and genuine love. Some promises, he reflected as Penelope's arms tightened around him, were not burdens but privileges. And some journeys, no matter how difficult their beginnings, led exactly where you were meant to be all along.